Hello and welcome to the webinar, International Trademark Searching and Filing Strategies, Protecting Your Brand in the Global Economy. My name is Bailey Reeves and I will be in the background answering any Adobe Connect technical questions. If you experience technical difficulties within the Adobe Connect session, please use the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen and our technical assistance team will help in any way possible. If you are having issues hearing over the phone, you may press *0 and an operator will assist you. Please note that as an attendee, you are part of a larger audience. However, to maintain privacy, the number and names of attendees will not be displayed. All attendees will be in a listen-only mode throughout the presentation, and as a reminder, today's call is being recorded. We will be holding a Q&A session at the conclusion of today's presentation. To submit a question, click on the Q&A panel located on the lower right-hand side of your screen. Type your question into the text field and hit send. This seminar is accredited for 1 hour of Illinois' MCLE credit. Please inquire if you wish to seek CLE accreditation in additional states. During the webinar, we will be providing 3 CLE codes. Please write these down. We will be mailing evaluation forms at the end of the webinar and will ask for the codes. If you have any questions regarding CLE, please contact cle@brinksgilson.com. With that, we invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy today's presentation. I would now like to introduce your first presenter for today, Joshua Frick. Josh, you now have the floor.
Thank you. My name is Josh Frick, and as Bailey mentioned, today's presentation is International Trademark Searching and Filing Strategies, Protecting Your Brand in a Global Economy. I'm joined today by 2 members of the Brinks trademark team, Susan Froling and Emily Caffers. And today, I guess one thing to mention is as we go through the presentation, there's going to be a few CLE codes, 3 CLE codes that you're going to have to write down or remember to get CLE credit for the presentation. The first one is brand protection. And just as a quick overview of the presentation, we're going to go over developing an international brand protection strategy, need to know information, things to consider when you're considering filing a trademark application, things such as potential trademark families, different versions of the same trademark to file applications for, designing a search plan, clearance search plan for the trademark, designing a protection plan for the trademark, and then also designing a filing plan with strategies for each one of these. To begin, for international brand protection strategies, there's many things to consider before you even get started. One of them is in-house resources. Companies' their budgets for trademark clearance and filing generally can change, and oftentimes they may even decrease as the companies are forced to meet tighter budgets. It's important to communicate with your outside counsel about the estimated costs and the budgets for the launch of a new brand. One issue that we see a lot of is clients want to protect the mark globally. That's the bullet point here, global. Is there a common understanding of what that means? It's interesting to see that when one client says they want to protect the mark globally, they could mean something completely different than what another person means globally. Someone could mean truly a global protection, and another person could just mean several markets, not including everything. Also, the budgets and the scope of work vary based on internal resources of the company. For example, if the company has a robust in-house trademark group, that group may perform most of the clearance work and even the filings for trademarks. So that has an effect on the budget and how much you rely on outside counsel to develop and implement your filing plan. And also, before launching a new brand and starting in a clearance search, there's other considerations outside of pure trademark clearance and filing, things to consider, such as regulatory restrictions on the product, also potential claims that may be made about the product in advertising, or maybe claims about a competitor's product. There's also consideration, you should also consider a digital advertising plan, specifically social media and watch outs. Are there any watch outs out there? And by that I mean, is there anything that would be clear blocks or clear issues before you even get into developing a digital marketing plan? Are there other uses on social media that have nothing to do with your product but could create issues down the road? And the last thing to consider before you start the plan is to start asking questions early and encourage your marketing team to start asking questions to get a conversation going before you start filing. Because even if there are no answers at the beginning of the plan, you at least get those ideas out there and you can solve any issues hopefully before they come up.
Okay, so the hypothetical that we are going to work with today is a new soup product, soup or a stew. They have both soups and stews in the pipeline for a new product that is going to be marketed as your family's weeknight meal solution. Stew is a microwavable hearty stews and soups that serve the whole family. There are 4 to 5 servings per pot, and the product itself comes in a red stew pot looking vessel. So the package really is a big part of this product. It's going to be a shelf-stable product that will be stored on grocery shelves next to a lot of other packaged goods, kind of middle of the aisle type of product. And you can see the logo stew that's depicted on the PowerPoint slide shows the actual look of the product, which has been incorporated as the letter U in the fanciful design of the word mark. There's steam coming out of the U too. The products are going to be low fat, low sodium, and delicious. The reason that we wanted to work with this mark, we thought it would be a good mark to talk about, is that there's all kinds of issues and variations of this mark from the very beginning. First of all, it's a very short name. It's just 3 letters, and it's the idea of this is it's short for the name Stuart, who was one of the founders, or maybe it was the founder's pet hamster named Stuart. So they like the name Stew as a short for Stuart, but it also plays on what we don't like to admit, but the generic term stew, which is, of course, in a different spelling, stew. But the marketers, of course, like this double entendre idea, and they like marks that pretty easily convey product benefit or product type. So stew is a very short and arguably highly descriptive name, yet it plays on a double entendre. That's the word mark version. And then there's a very nice sort of stylized version that incorporates the product sort of package and configuration as part of the U in the stew letter. And it's going to be very consistently depicted in red. That's very much a part of the product equity. So we can talk about color in a stylized version of the word mark as well. And again, the U and the actual product shape, the packaging is going to be something that the marketers and the company believes is highly unique in the marketplace. This is the first of its kind, a super stew, shelf-stable, in a pot-looking package that even includes these little handles that don't themselves have any functional benefit. They're really you're not going to necessarily use them to carry from the microwave to table, but they make it look more like a homemade stew pot kind of thing. So we'll be talking about a lot of these elements as we move through the hypothetical. So the basics, when you're starting any kind of a worldwide search or launch, what you want to know from the clients are several things. And a lot of this is pretty basic, like where and when is the launch. And when we say when, is this going to be a national product? Is it going to start in the U.S.? Where else is it going to go? And when? How long will the product be in market? I mean, surprisingly, in a lot of industries, it's certainly true in the food industry, where I come from originally, there are a lot of products that are meant for a short life, in and outs, we used to call them, or limited time products. And just understanding sort of the plan, and particularly if there's maybe a shorter term plan for a product, can be really important and informative of how much searching and how much filing you end up doing, which of course is a huge impact on budget. Background on the marks. It's always nice to really get the full story of how the name came to be. So is Stuart really the name of the marketing guy, his name of his pet? Is it really because all the qualitative research showed that people liked this product the best when they knew exactly what it was and it was called the generic term? I mean, it's nice to know what documents and what thinking kind of went on to come up with the original name, because you can do some issue spotting there. And it'll, I think, help advise and inform the going forward tasks in terms of clearance. background on the goods and services. Is this really a reaction to a competitive product? Is it sort of capitalizing on a particular trend, or is this something that's true innovation? Again, those types of things, the more you understand the background and the thinking about where the product came to be, the more you can really understand what you may want to do to both be sure it's clear and then to maybe grab as much protection as you possibly can based on the true originality or distinctiveness of a new product. How it will be sold, where it is manufactured, and the where it is manufactured part can be particularly helpful to know for defensive purposes. If products are being produced in some jurisdictions where there are kind of higher risks or incidents of counterfeiting or being copied, it may be necessary to do some trademark and even other filings in those jurisdictions, even if the original plans aren't necessarily to market there, just so you don't get manufacturer filing for your trademark in a place where they may be able to get away with that or something very similar to your trademark. What are the competitive products? I think this is really important. It's similar to the background of the mark. There were times in my practice where, without understanding or knowing what the new product was really meant to compete with, I probably would have missed a trade dress problem. It's really, as much as you do word searching, and we can look on Google for other products that might look the same as some intended packages, it's a lot easier and quicker if your marketing people can be really upfront with what they're trying, who and what they're trying to compete with this new product. Because if there's perhaps a very popular red potted shelf-stable stew in Europe that somebody saw while on vacation, that would just be something pretty important to know. And the best people to know that are the marketers whom you're talking to from the beginning of the search and sort of discussion of the new launch. What makes your product different than others? It's always good to get the marketing people's idea of what's distinctive about their product. So is it really just the pot idea? Is it the handle? Is it the shelf stable? Like what's unique? Because clearly the unique aspects are what they're going to care about being protected, but it's also good at that time to manage expectations and do, if necessary, some reality checking on what they may think distinctive may be a little bit different than from where you and your lawyer position sit, especially the in-house team. From what you've seen in your many years there, that maybe there are some things that aren't as different from the marketplace as they may think. So it's good to manage expectations there, but also really be able to serve your client better by really meeting their needs. The things they think are most distinctive are probably what you're going to want to try the hardest to get protection for if it's possible. And then the last piece, is it a standalone mark, or is it going to be part of a line extension, or is it going to start a line extension? Sort of where does this fit from the bucket of products that your client already offers? And again, that's just good information to know that may inform searching and filing decisions. Okay, obviously you have to convey to your business team how expensive this is. There are obviously costs to searching and costs to filing, and that's a discussion to have really pretty early on in the process. And it's a two-way discussion, really. What do they want to do with the budget that they have, and how does the trademark searching and filing fit into that? And then the timing for searches. Again, manage expectations. Searches, especially worldwide searches, can be kind of long. 2 weeks is what we've always said, or what I typically say, I should say, about 2 weeks for a full search for the U.S. But when you get into big global searches, as anybody who's practiced internationally knows, there are some countries where you can't even get a search report back for 2 months. So good to sort of set a timeline from the beginning that'll be informed by the countries of interest for the first piece of the work. And then my favorite, alternatives if stew is not available. So always good to have backup names, obviously. I know that for a while, in my in-house practice days, we really pushed for 5 alternative names, at least 5 that would work. And then we would always agree to go up to 15 in terms of preliminary scanning. Like the more ideas, the better from the beginning, but just we didn't want to have to scan 50 because it would take too long and cost too much from an internal resource perspective. But our sweet spot was, come up with 10 names that you could live with, 5 that you really like, and we can hopefully work from there. The hardest thing, as we know in the trademark practice, is if you are kind of coming into the game as late at a point in time where the marketing team and the business is completely wedded to one name, because especially if this is going to be in a couple of countries, that puts you in a very, very tough position, because it's hard to clear marks. It's going to be really hard to clear stew in one country, never mind, globally. So good to have backups, and that's something to communicate early and often.
Okay, so now we're assuming that we have our information from marketing, and the product that we're going to be protecting is a soup to be used in connection with the mark stew. Marketing also for now has an interest in developing a video game app. In this instance, soup is far removed from a video game app. Moreover, the app is just an idea at this point and has not yet come to fruition. Accordingly, it may be best to focus on the protection of stew solely in connection with soup as we begin considering a trademark filing strategy. So in considering a trademark filing strategy, we want to divide countries of interest into tiers. Here, you'll see that stew's countries of interest are divided into 3 tiers. Countries of primary interest are first, and they are critical to the client's launch. In regard to Tier 1, marketing wants to launch stew in the first primary country of interest within 6 months. So let's say that the first country is the U.S. Even if the client does not have the good perfected, or if its branding isn't fully prepared, the client should still conduct at minimum a preliminary search. And then, we always recommend that following up with a comprehensive full search is best. Assuming that the search does not present a high risk, the client can then file an intent to use U.S. trademark application for the primary class of goods. Here, soup is in class 29. We can then rely on the U.S. priority filing date as we expand our applications to additional Tier 1 countries for up to 6 months after we first file the intent to use application in the U.S. It's important to note some of the potential obstacles and pitfalls that you may run into in some of the client's Tier 1 countries. For instance, the client's interested in Russia. Russia does not allow the registration of acronyms. While you could argue that stew is a phonetic spelling of stew, S-T-E-W, due to Russia's prohibition on trademark registration for acronyms, it is also quite difficult to register 3-letter words in Russia. Another example of a potential pitfall to the client's Tier 1 countries is Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe offers several ways to file trademark applications. They have a multi-regional application through the African Regional Intellectual Property Organization. They have a national application, and they have an international option through the Madrid Protocol. However, while Zimbabwe has acceded to the Madrid Protocol, it has not yet passed legislation to incorporate the treaty into local law, which means that an applicant is still subject to all requirements of Zimbabwe's national trademark application. We note that this will change after Zimbabwe has enacted the treaty into its own local law. Moreover, and another example of a potential pitfall is that Zimbabwe has specific application requirements, including the requirement that 10 specimens be submitted for any marks other than a word mark. This diverges from the typical submission of a single specimen for any applied for mark. We can also see that in Tier 2, we've designated the next set of countries, which the client intends to introduce stew to in the next 2 to 5 years. We note that some of the countries identified in Tier 2 are already protected by a community trademark registration, which would have been obtained at the time Tier 1 countries such as the Netherlands, Germany, or For the time being, the UK, although we note this may change in light of Brexit, were registered, as all are members of the European Union. Here's another common pitfall. While France and Spain are both EU member countries and therefore covered by a CTM registration, Norway and Iceland are not. Consequently, to protect STU in Norway and Iceland, the client must file a separate national trademark application in both countries. Finally, looping back to the video game app, any registration sought for the app will be designated to Tier 3 because the app is not a core product of STU. Typically, filing for the video game app in every country of interest, which is in a fully separate class than Class 29, would be immensely expensive. It is therefore recommended to either file additional applications to cover the app at a later date or simply use the mark in connection with the app but not file for registration. Another important consideration is the number of trademark registrations sought to protect in the STU family of marks. The client has about 7 marks it could register for. Typically, however, it's best practice to first file for registration of the word mark. Here, that is STU, S-T-U, by itself, without stylization, color, or the inclusion of the fanciful pot as the U. Doing so provides the broadest amount of coverage possible, meaning the client has the most flexibility in the way it uses its mark. However, we run into a few issues with the STU word mark that Susan had alluded to earlier. It's possible that we could not even get the STU word mark registered. The USPTO could view STU as generic. It's a phonetic equivalent of STEW, S-T-E-W. If that were the case, we could fall back on seeking registration of the stylized STU with a fanciful U pot. After filing for registration of the word mark, if we were able to, the client can consider filing for a stylized version, which includes the pot in the place of the U and even the design of the product packaging. It is important to note an application to register product packaging presents additional issues. Product packaging may prove difficult to protect, as this will be further discussed in this presentation. Another consideration is the necessity of filing for the solo STU and STU for 2 marks. Are these so important to the client that they're worth protecting individually? Or is the client better off using the trademark registration symbol in connection with its registered STU mark and adding in the word solo or words for 2 at a later date?
The second CLE code is April 4th, 2017.
All right, so designing a plan for the STU family of marks. We talked about this earlier, the tier approach, which is really just about priorities. So marketing needs to decide the top priorities for its product, at least from a timeline perspective. So normally, Tier 1 countries are the countries that are going to have launches in the near future. I guess with unlimited budget, the tier approach isn't needed, but in today's the realistic business environment today really calls for breaking things up so that you can split the budget for searches and filings over several years or several quarters. I think this is usually a pretty easy conversation to have with marketing teams who are pretty used to budget constraints and also having to sort of stagger timing of various tasks. So that's a discussion for trademark lawyers and business people to have together to identify the most critical countries and also the particular aspects or the particular elements that they want to start with for searches and then filings. As a shorthand way of speaking to marketing in these early conversations, you can use, I often use the general estimate of about $2,000 to search and file one trademark in one class. That, of course, is going to vary quite a bit country to country, but just to give the marketing teams an idea of the magnitude of the costs. It's easy to use a nice round number that's probably a little on the conservative side, and that usually brings the conversation pretty quickly into, okay, let's really talk about the top priorities. So as Emily said earlier, the word mark in plain block letters is often the most sought after mark to get. It's going to give you the broadest protection across colors and design schemes. So we'd love to start with that. And then, of course, some secondary marks that's really driven by the client's ideas of what the most important or distinctive aspects of their new mark are will also be considered. And I would think in the stew world, I think that beside the word mark, and I think we can talk about like the design mark being a close second because it's really a fallback for any issues, descriptiveness and generic issues we may get with the stew mark alone. I think that it's really important to talk to marketing about that product configuration that they would really like to own. It would be great for this food company to be the only marketers of stew in a pot, certainly of a shelf-stable stew in a red pot, handled pot. So I think that element is probably going to be one that's highly desired and maybe difficult to both search and clear and register in lots of countries. But hypothetically, the word mark in plain block and this pot vessel would be the two kind of tier one elements, and then picking the countries is something that was really marketing driven. But back to that tier one list, it was marketing driven, but we were also kind of maybe one of those countries is actually where the product is being produced. So that would mean that as a safety, as a defensive measure, we would probably want to register in the country of creation, as well as the countries that are really critical from a marketing standpoint. Business plans, product services to include a search strategy. Yeah, I mean, it's really great to be able to do full searches everywhere, at least for the word mark. And when you have the time to allow that, that's great. I think maybe that can be staggered too. I mean, sometimes if it's going to be a truly global product, kind of the best way to handle it is to do your U.S. search where the business is going to start, and then assuming that clears, maybe pick a handful of other countries in various regions, if you kind of spread it out regionally, and do like a first pass, and let's do a full search in some of the big markets for tier one that maybe kind of cover various aspects of the globe so that you can spot, hopefully, a regional competitor that may be in a few countries, but if you're going to do China and Asia, maybe you're going to catch it there, which will inform your strategy for an alternative mark or adding a word or some variation that might be necessary for all of Asia. Again, for the global stuff, you'll want to get local counsel involved. They're the legal experts, and sometimes they've got the creative ideas to coexist or to figure out a slight alteration of a mark that would still work with the business plan for their particular market. So they're critical not only for doing the searching work, but also to come up with creative solutions when there are blocks or issues. So if the searching isn't possible, if full searches aren't going to be possible from a cost or a time standpoint, and you can hopefully do at least a handful of the full searches and then supplement those with more preliminary type searches that can be done by local counsel, or if that's even too expensive or not possible from a time perspective, there are, of course, tools that we can use in-house or that law firms have access to that can do preliminary kind of knockout scans in various markets. And those tools are just getting better and better and broader in terms of countries covered. So that's a great option for either the very beginning stage or just for some of the countries if you're running into a time crunch and can only do a few full searches.
Real quickly, I see a note here about the second CLE code. The second CLE code was April 4th, 2017. Just so you have it, the first CLE code was brand protection.
Oh, to remind people. Okay, the search plan for focus on Tier 1, we've talked about this a little bit already. Timelines are critical because once you understand the timeline, you can sort of tailor your search plan based on that. Vendor tools are great. I won't get into the specific ones, but as I did mention, they're better and better, and the costs are really getting, it's a very cost-effective way to at least see if you're probably going to run into problems in a particular region. The scope of the preliminary search is obviously limited, and that's particularly true in countries that are common law based, where you have to worry about use that isn't even registered. And those are the British common law countries. So we try not to rely on preliminary searches really in most instances, but in common law countries maybe even less so. And then what are you going to search? Are you just going to search the word mark? Are you going to try to find every fanciful U, any pot, sort of fanciful pot design? And then in terms of actually searching for product configuration trade dress or trademarks that are really like the pot itself, that's pretty hard. And I know that that's something that it's challenging, I think, for even the outside lawyers using the best tools possible because there are design codes involved and sometimes it's just not easy to gather similarity from full search reports on designs. And again, in common law countries where companies can arguably gain trademark rights over use in packaging or in a particular look, that's going to be a little bit tough to spot too. So the design searching, particularly on product configuration, can be really, really hard, and we should leave ample time and money to do that. Investigations are the next thing that I'll mention. Full searches we've talked about. Investigations are great, and often they're really common. It's really common practice, as we know, in the United States. But I think investigators that you hire when you run into marks that are arguably similar or that could be blocking are often the gateway to consent agreements, which may be the way that you can get your mark or your one consistent mark cleared or at least usable worldwide. So doing a little investigation to understand what is being done around a mark that is initially cited by outside counsel or that you look at and think it might be a block. If you do a little bit more digging, you can get into, the investigators can find out really more about the channels of trade or the specific demographic that's being targeted. So, and that's the kind of information that can be really helpful to trying to come up with some sort of a coexistence and paving the way for your mark with some maybe limitations on various aspects of its marketing or its registration. In-house versus outside, in terms of search plan, that's really a lot of times just a matter of resources, both human resources. I know that a lot of trademark teams are really staffed to be able to do a lot of in-house work, but if they are great, at least on the U.S. side, and then the outside counsel can come in for the foreign marks and, if needed, to work on investigations and maybe consent agreements if the inside lawyer wants to pass it off at that time. And I think another good use of outside counsel for U.S. full search and full clearance practice is to seek anonymous consents. So if you're an in-house lawyer and you're launching a product in the U.S., it's then going to go global, and you find in your search and then through your investigation that there's really maybe someone that could successfully object to your use, never mind registration down the road, sometimes it's nice to have an outside law firm contact that entity on an anonymous basis. You can say that they represent a national food company and they're interested in launching a product that's pretty different than the product you seem to have, but we would like to be able to live together peacefully. We're willing to pay you a little bit for that. But we really, we would like to launch without the risk and the stress of an objection early on. So, the upside of that is you can pave the way to get more marks cleared, hopefully. We had a lot of success with that, frankly, in my craft job. We did that a lot. The downside, of course, is if you're told no, you probably need to stay even farther away from that mark than you might have had to had you not called them in the first place. But again, investigations can give you a lot of information that can help inform a consent agreement, and outside counsel can often be the right person to make that contact just because they can at least start the negotiations on an anonymous basis for you until maybe the money is settled on, and then of course you disclose. And then alternate marks, always ask for those, encourage those, insist on those. All right.
The next thing we'd like to discuss is a protection plan. What should we protect? As Emily mentioned earlier, there's several different variations of the STU mark that that we could consider protecting. There's the word mark, the stylized version of the word mark with the pot design in place of the U, the actual product packaging, the red pot that holds the soup or the stew, a slogan, a social media campaign that would include hashtags and similar uses like that, and then also companion products and trademarks. Down the line, maybe variations of solo stew or stew for two. These are all, they're potential marks on the table to consider, and we just want to walk through some of the considerations that you should at least, pay attention to before filing an application. The first is the word mark, and then the stylized version of the word mark, the stew with the pot. The first, I guess, consideration is, should you file in black and white, or should you file in color versions of these? And as Emily mentioned, the black and white, just a plain block text word mark, provides the broadest scope of protection. It's usually where we like to start with the filing. Get that application on file. It's a good basis for anything that may come afterwards. Same thing for the stylized version of it. We usually advise clients to file for the black and white version of any stylized mark because it provides the broadest scope of protection. It would use the mark in any color variation. While it's not necessary, it's often useful to color or to apply to register word marks or stylized versions of word marks in color in various countries, especially in countries where you run into a higher risk of counterfeiting. Like, for example, we found it's useful to file applications to register stylized versions of marks in Russia and China, where you run into counterfeiting issues. They get very creative on how to knock off your product, and it's often best to have as many registrations for the different variations of the mark on file, just to provide you a broader scope of protection, and it also gives you more registrations to point to if you get into an infringement action in those markets. You also want to consider, we're talking about a worldwide filing strategy here. So, you have the STU mark in the United States. Is it worthwhile, or is it advisable to file for a translation of that mark or a transliteration of that mark in various markets? Also, there's different countries that use different alphabets. So, for example, if you're filing in Russia, do you need to file for STU, S-T-U, in those letters, or should you use Cyrillic, or should you do both, or one or the other? And that's where advice from local counsel is really helpful in talking through the issues that would come with that. And also phonetics. In the United States, would it make sense to file for STU, S-T-U? Maybe not the best example, but S-T-E-W, that's even more descriptive, so you'd be walking into more issues there. But even in other markets, it's something to consider whether or not it's necessary, or if it's a good idea to file for phonetics of the mark. And then also regional considerations. You have a mark in the U.S. With the translation of that mark in a different market, would that be something offensive or have some other meaning that you didn't intend that would be detrimental to your product there? It's something to talk through and explore before you start filing marks, and then find out once it's on the market that you have a product that is not something you intended at all, and then you have to rebrand. So these are all things to walk through or discuss internally and potentially with outside counsel before you start filing in different markets for the word and the stylized version of the mark. The next is the product design. So we've touched on this a couple times before in the presentation, and one option or one thing, at least in this scenario, is the marketing team would like to have protection for this red, the actual vessel, the actual pot that holds the soup that's going to be on the shelf. This red pot with the rounded bottom but still stable on the shelf and the handles on the side. They want protection for that. They don't want other companies to use this red pot. So what are the options for protecting that? At least in the U.S., you have two main options. You can get trademark registration for the trade dress, or you can get a design patent. For both of those, the protection will protect the ornamental nature, the design of the product, and not any functional characteristics of the product. So, for example, here, if the handles of the pot served a utilitarian function where maybe the design prevented consumers from burning their hands on the side of the pot, or something like that, where it would provide us with an advantage over competitors that it serves some function there, that would not be protectable. But here I would argue that this design, there's arguments both ways, but I would argue that it's not functional. This is just one of many designs of a pot that you could use. There's nothing special, at least functionally, about this design. It doesn't provide any advantage to us over competitors. They could have any other type of design of the pot. So that's why I would argue it's not functional. And therefore, you could get a design patent. Usually the design patent is, you can get it faster than trade dress protection. So we usually recommend filing for that earlier. It sort of serves as a placeholder, gets you some protection for the design of the product. It's, like I said, you can get the registration faster. The main reason for that is because trade dress protection, it usually requires that you show that there's an acquired distinctiveness to the design, that consumers associate that design with your company, and it's associated with a single source of the product. So that takes time to build up that recognition in the marketplace. And the design patent gives you protection while you're building the use and the sales and the advertising and building all of that up, so you can show acquired distinctiveness, either if you're going to file an infringement suit, or if you can file an application to register the product design with the USPTO. So it's sort of two prongs of protection. One gets you protection faster, the design patents, and then the trade dress protection. It's possible, it just takes a little more time while you build up the secondary meaning, the acquired distinctiveness there. And another thing that I just wanted to mention is the industrial design protection. This is in the European Union. It's sometimes called the community design protection. It's similar to a design patent in the U.S., but it's in the European Union, protects all the countries in the European Union. It's just something to keep in mind if the product packaging that you're using in the U.S. and in Europe is important. It's something to keep in mind and discuss with your local counsel there.
So in this scenario, marketing is also interested in registering "Leave it to Stu," the slogan. And the question is, should we register it? We note that slogans aren't always registerable in all countries. Further, a potential discussion to have with the client is whether they need to register the slogan at all. "Leave it to Stu" is not particularly distinctive. The most distinctive part of the slogan is, in fact, the Stu mark, which the client would have already sought registration for. Beyond that, the client could consider relying on common law rights, which would provide the client with some rights simply through its use of the slogan. However, if the client were to follow this route, our filing strategy may change depending on the countries the client is interested in protecting the marks in. Not all countries provide the same protections for common law use of a mark, such as the "Leave it to Stu" slogan. Therefore, as was previously mentioned, it's important to work with local counsel for filing strategies like these, just to really understand the rights that you'll be gaining for the client. Additional considerations for whether or not you should register the slogan depend on how the slogan will be used. Will the slogan be included on all product packaging? How long will the slogan be used for? If the slogan "Leave it to Stu" is only part of a brief marketing campaign, is applying for registration of the slogan even worth it? A question to ask marketing is, does a registration of the slogan add any value or protection to the client's rights? Marketing is also interested in registration of hashtag Let's Stew for its social media campaign. As with the slogan, Leave It to Stew, we should really consider and ask the client questions regarding its intended use of the social media hashtag. Often marketing gets excited and wants rights to everything relating to the product, but often seeking rights for everything can be unnecessary. While it's a good idea to run at least a preliminary search to confirm that there are not conflicts with use of the hashtag Let's Stew, unless there will be long-term use or the hashtag will be included on product packaging, again, it may not be worth seeking registration of the hashtag. This is an instance in which registration is not really the best use of the client's resources.
So determining classes and identifications. This is kind of the straightforward stuff. I think it's just sort of the point of this slide is that it's really good, at least in the beginning, to really stay focused on your core goods. I know that marketers sometimes are really excited about moving beyond the soup, and they're already on their video game, and then they think maybe they want to register for advertising services because there's going to be this really big advertising campaign. And I don't know if others run into this with their marketing teams, but really the point of the trademark is really where you're going to get the bang for your buck is just stick to your core products in the beginning. It's not only cost effective, it's probably going to be all you do with the mark in the end. And if it comes to the point where you're really going to create a video game or you're going to do a big collateral licensing project, you're going to embark upon sending Stu to lots of T-shirts and water bottles and that kind of thing. I think it's good to sort of buy time on that and say, let's start with the core goods and get ample registrations in place for the products that you're really trying to market under this brand, and then table the discussion about additional goods, ancillary goods, collateral goods, whatever, for 6 months to a year post-launch. I mean, the sad story is that most products don't make it anyway, at least in a lot of the consumer products world. And so unless there are really imminent big plans for something beyond the core, it's usually prudent to push that off and decide just to revisit that issue 6 months down the road, post-launch. All right, the determining classes and goods IDs. This can be complicated depending on your business. In the stew world, the food world, is probably not super hard because it's a pretty easy product to name and it fits into the NICE identifications in Class 29. But obviously, the U.S. has a kind of a different rules around what goods IDs to use. You really need a bona fide intention to use that mark on particular goods to be able to register it here, and that isn't the case in lots of other countries. So it may be that you want to consider broader-based filings if the marks are clear. In some countries where it's more best practice to file for broader, even full classes of goods in 29. So you may have different goods IDs in different places, and that's something that's worth checking out with local counsel. And it's also if you can afford it, because as we'll talk about other filing programs that require you to use, such as Madrid, where you're really required to use the goods ID in the home application as you extend out to other countries for registration. You're not going to be able to go broader in countries that would allow you to go broader because they don't have this really narrow goods ID requirement or bona fide intention to use requirement. The other thing is if you have a service that's relatively complicated, sometimes it's really hard in some global markets to get that mark registered for the goods the services that you think you provide, because the goods ID just isn't accepted by the local office because it doesn't conform to the niche descriptions of what the services are. We run into that with some of our clients, particularly in the service world. So, things to consider there. Filing strategies, I'm just going to touch upon these now and not get into the details, but there are ways to sort of get more than one country through one payment or a filing, and those are worth considering if you can live with some of the downsides, such as being hemmed in on a goods ID, Madrid. But regional options where you can get one trademark that covers lots of countries is, of course, the EUTM through the Intellectual Property Office in Europe, and then there's the French-speaking African countries where you can get, 16 or 18 countries covered through an OAPI registration, at least theoretically. Filing systems where you can cut down your number of filings and have them extended on to different countries, that's WIPO and RIPO. And then timing of filings is also something to consider. It can really help you. Paris Convention countries, of which there are many, many, allow you to use the priority date of the first filing as long as your subsequent filings happen within a 6-month period in the other countries. Good to know your launch date because that may inform when you want to do your filings. There may be reason for delay. And then stealth filings, this is just something to consider if your product's super secret and you really don't want the world knowing that you're about to launch the world's first shelf-stable stew in a pot. You may want to file in the U.S. first as food products. Keep the description really vague. You're going to get an office action, but an office action means that you've just bought yourself 6 months, and you can at least get your name on file for the broad category of food in 29, and then get your goods ID in order for registration when you're closer to launch, so that you're not tipping your hat as to what the products are. And another option is to file in a different country, and then use that date. This will get you 6 months. If you want to file in a country, Paris Convention country, and then use the priority date from that other country's filing to file in the U.S., that's your main market. You can do that within the 6 months of that first filing. That's all I'm going to say on that.
So Susan's touched on the Madrid Protocol briefly. The Madrid Protocol presents a more centralized option for applications, filings, and registrations. It's also cheaper. It's an option in which the client may designate numerous countries. There's 98 countries prior to the Madrid Protocol, and base each Madrid filing on its home application. While each Madrid filing is based on the client's home country, each filing will undergo individual country examinations. As a result, the client may obtain registrations for its mark without issue in certain countries, but wait several years for the same registration in others. Moreover, the client should again consider the value of preliminary and in some instances, as we've discussed, full searches in its countries of interest. Madrid Protocol pros and cons. Pros of the Madrid Protocol include lower filing fees, lower maintenance fees, the national registrations, lower transaction fees, and the ability to file through the USPTO. Cons include the fact that any Madrid trademark filing or registration is dependent on the home filing for 5 years. Here, if we consider that the client's home application is in the U.S. And that we applied to register the STU word mark, if the application for the STU word mark were to fall, any applications designated through Madrid would also fall, and as a result, the client would lose all of its applications. Another drawback of Madrid filings, as Susan alluded to, that are dependent on U.S. applications as the home filing are the limitations placed on U.S. identifications of goods and services. U.S. identifications of goods and services are typically narrow, and by relying on a U.S. registration, the client will be unable to get a broader base of protection for its mark.
I also want to touch on a couple more of these areas where you can file one application and get protection in multiple countries. One that we've touched on is the European Union trademarks, formerly known as the Community Trademark System. It covers the 28 countries in the European Union, and it also, once you get the registration, the protection will extend to any new member nations. It's important to note that it does not include Norway or Switzerland, and with the UK in the Brexit issue, we've been recommending to clients to, if you're going to file an EU trademark, then also file separately in the United Kingdom. And then also it's important to note that we are hearing from counsel over there that, that if there's an existing EU trademark, that this is an issue that they're considering in the Brexit process, and they're going to hopefully convert the EU trademark to a UK trademark and maintain protection there and priority. So if you already have registration, hopefully you won't see any issues once the Brexit process is complete. Cons of the pro is you file one application and give you protection in all these countries. A con is if you're only interested in one country, it may not be worthwhile to file an EU trademark because it's more expensive and you may not need it. And another con is by filing the EU trademark application, it opens you up to oppositions from many more parties. Any of the EU countries, if they have a EU registration, you could be getting oppositions from 5 countries rather than just the one country where you truly have an interest. And the last filing strategies that I want to touch on are 2 in Africa. One is the ARIPO, which is the African Regional Intellectual Property Organization, and also OAPI, African Intellectual Property Organization. And between these 2 filing systems, they're relatively cheap, and you can extend protection to a total of 35 African countries combined. The ARIPO filing is similar to the Madrid filing, where it's a centralized filing but national examination. There's oppositions and cancellations. The OAPI is more akin to an EU, where you file an EU trademark, where you file one application and your protection is spread out to the various countries. There are no oppositions for the OAPI. You have to file, or you have to renew annually, and also the OAPI is fairly recently been added to the Madrid system, so you can extend by a Madrid filing to the OAPI. And that, I think, is it. The last CLE code is Madrid. Again, it's Madrid. And if anybody has any questions, we'd be happy to hear them. And if not, then thank you for joining us. All right. It doesn't look like anybody has any questions, so thank you very much. It's been our pleasure. Bye.